question here. Let me get your thoughts on Ronda Rousey. I want to talk about Ronda Rousey on Tough because I want to take this from a couple different perspectives. Because what I really want to talk about is a piece that you wrote on MMAPayout.com, which is your Payout Perspective. Fantastic piece. It's kind of what I like about it is it's almost like a blog, and I like the quick hitters, and that's what it's all about. So one of the things you talked about was Rousey on Tough, which we just talked about with Adam. Never mind the men and the women. Let's talk about her. They're putting her on Tough. Dana has said publicly he prefers her on pay-per-view to on Fox. What do you think the thinking is behind that? Why does he want her on pay-per-views? Why is he putting her on Tough? I know she's kind of bang for your buck, but what is his thinking?
I think definitely 157 showed them that Rousey can definitely produce pay-per-view, and she could hold a pay-per-view, because that whole 157 to me seemed like a test balloon as far as how far they could take women's MMA, how far they could take Ronda Rousey. It's definitely, definitely, I know there was that argument of, well, maybe they should have put her on Fox first, introduced her to the masses, then put her on pay-per-view. But I think with the UFC's thinking is they're taking advantage of her as an asset and putting her on pay-per-view right away. 157 showed that it did about 450 to 475,000 buys, which is almost on par with the John Jones pay-per-view. John Jones does a little more, maybe 550 average. But still, with that being said, that's better than most of the other usual pay-per-views. Tough really helps her brand, the Ronda Rousey brand. It'll definitely get that. Like I said, even though it has not been announced, it will most likely be on FX. When Dana White announced it on Saturday night, it was immediately on the front pages of a lot of like the Yahoo front page, ESPN, crossover places like that. One of the other benefits of her on Tough, it'll probably attract some mainstream advertisers. I know if anybody watches the current season of Tough, you'll see that they have the pop-up screens for Harley Davidson, and they have the NOS energy drink logo, things like that. I think it'll definitely draw in more advertisers to the program, definitely get the Rousey name out there. And it's proven that she is a crossover appeal. What I found was interesting is that she made appearances after 157, not just the fact that she did a lot of the press hyping the fight. After the fight, she appeared on ESPN. She was on the Dan Patrick show. Dan Patrick doesn't really necessarily like MMA, and they still had her on after the fight. So, these are things where I think the mainstream media kind of was like, well, let's see what happens. Oh, okay, they like her. Let's put her on. So there will definitely be a lot of press going into this next season of Tough, and that's what the UFC wants. They want to revive this series that has been slumping, and go from there.
And do you think that the having the men and women on there, including with Ronda Rousey, do you think this is like kind of not a ploy, but a marketing tactic to say, have the girlfriends watch Tough with their boyfriends, kind of a thing, the wives and the husbands? Do you think that brings the female eye to would Ronda Rousey bring the female eye by herself, or do you think having the women fighters on as well is going to bring? Is that the goal?
I think the interesting thing is I think Rousey could bring the women dynamic in and of itself. The fact that there's women fighters on the show, it could bring in women as well. But like Rousey herself, she could probably bring in a certain amount of women viewers. The addition of women fighters probably bring in a lot more. And I think that you add that real world / Big Brother component of men and women in a house. There is that interplay that there's something for people who aren't interested in MMA to watch, because there'll be friction between one woman and one man, or two women that hate each other, that type of friction where people will want to tune in to see that potential fight. Whereas right now with Tough, you're just waiting for an MMA fight at the last 20 minutes of the episode, and usually the casual viewer who's not really into MMA won't watch it.
Yeah, and like you said, there may be a situation too where some of the men and women start palling up, not even, from a sexual standpoint, just their buddies. And now anytime you enter women into an equation with men, it can be a recipe for disaster sometimes. So maybe that's the case. Maybe that, you get a couple weak-minded individuals in there as guys, and then some chick you just met, and it just all plummets downhill from there. I think the interesting thing that I want to see is what sort of advertisers are going to be on Tough, because I used to tell buddies of mine, if you think that if you're wondering if a magazine is geared for you, don't look at the articles, look at the advertisements. And if any of the people in the advertisements look like you, if they're driving the kind of car you drive or they're wearing the kind of watch you can afford, that's a magazine for you. If it's not, then it's geared to somebody else. If they're in there wearing polos and you wear, fight gear, then, maybe you shouldn't be reading GQ. Maybe you should be reading, Knuckleheads Illustrated or whatever. So I think that'll be telling too, to see, like, are there women geared advertisers on this season of Tough, and if that's the case, then they're going after that demographic. Okay, moving forward, let's get back to 158 for a second, because I want to talk about some of the other stuff that you wrote about. So let's get to the attendance, the gate, and the bonuses for UFC 158. So go ahead and talk to me about how you feel like UFC 158 performed with those metrics.
158 did pretty well in terms of attendance. It did about a little over 20,000 fans. Did about 3.71 million gate. The bonus, to talk about that a little bit, it ranked fourth in Bell Center UFC events, and fourth sounds kind of bad, but the first three were St. Pierre Serra was number one. Second was a card which, talking about Thales Latis, it was Anderson Silva versus Thales Latis. Chuck Liddell with Shogun Rua was number two, and the third highest ranked attendance gate was GSP Koscheck. So not too shabby as far as where UFC 158 slots in. As far as their bonuses, there were only two. First one was, of course, Condit Hendricks for Fight of the Night. That was a hands down an easy one to get. And then the other one was, of course, Jake Ellenberger's knockout of Nate Marquardt. Now, there were no submissions of the night. I found it interesting that they didn't double up and give either Jordan Mean, a Rick Story, or TJ Dillashaw a KO bonus of the night as well, just to make up for the non-sub of the night. But it was announced earlier in the week that, as people have figured out, that the bonuses, the standard post-fight bonus is now $50,000, whereas it fluctuated between, from $40,000 to $65,000 a night. So now Dana has come out and said, nope, standard is $50,000. So I'm not sure if this is the UFC kind of curbing their bonuses, curbing their payroll, or something else.
Yeah, do you think it's something that we don't even need to worry about? It's just kind of a throwaway thing, or do you think that they're really? I mean, can we read the writing on the wall here that the UFC is not necessarily maybe going through financial troubles, but they're starting to say, okay, we need to get our budget together?
I think it's the latter. I think they're just trying to get their budget together. I think you'll definitely see a little more of the stricter policies on certain things, and the bonus is one thing. One of the things that I actually need to check up on is, remember they used to have quarterly social media bonuses and announcements?
Yeah.
Haven't heard of those in a while, have they? And so, I mean, that's one thing I'm not sure if they're still implementing or not. So that'll be something I'll check up on. But as far as the bonuses, I'm not sure why Dana actually came out to say it's $50,000. You could obviously see from the start of the year there was a pattern of everyone was just getting $50,000. So we'll see if there'll be more curbing of the payroll or of its budget.
All right, well, let's move on to another thing that was on the Payout Perspective, again on MMAPayout.com, written by Jason Cruz. What about the promotion of the fight? You had some interesting things to say about that.
Yeah, I think it was two words, Nick Diaz. I think that's definitely carried the fight, the fight promotion. It was the teleconference that promoted everything. I think his flare up at the teleconference sent everything, ascended the promotion of the fight. he definitely came out and was Nick Diaz. Um, and the press conference, like I had said alluded to earlier, a lot more people than usual tuned in or logged on to the press conference and heard him talk about wolf tickets. And now if you look on at MiddleEasy.com, they're selling wolf ticket shirts. And I think he alone helped propel this fight to where it ended up. The friction he caused between GSP, the fact that it seemed that GSP was rattled by what Diaz was saying, and it just seemed very much an all Nick Diaz promotion of the fight. Now there definitely was some thought that there was going to be a UFC primetime associated with the promotion of this fight, and Dana had alluded to the fact that Diaz didn't show up for any of the dates for it. So I'm not sure whether or not they were going to do a primetime. It seems like with GSP, even though it's repetitive, you want to do extra promotion by doing a primetime 3-part episode, but it just didn't seem like Diaz was willing to do it.
And moving on with Nick Diaz, I actually wrote something on Cage Wall. I'll have to send you a link to it. It's the title of it was "Say Goodnight to the Bad Guy," kind of a tip of the cap to Scarface, because with Nick Diaz talking about retiring, the next thing I wanted to talk about is his marketing. But because I know you talked to his marketing person.
Yep, his marketing agent.
All right, so I'm gonna get into that here in a sec. But the reason why what I wrote about was, does the UFC need Nick Diaz more than it knows? Was my question, and the reason what I posed is that Nick Diaz, in so much as the UFC kind of bills themselves as real as it gets, it doesn't get any more real than Nick Diaz. And the thing that I said that I think another thing I find interesting about him is Nick Diaz is as much a Stockton bad boy as you can get, but he would never call himself that. That's the difference between Nick Diaz and a guy like Tito Ortiz. Nick Diaz is the real deal, and I'm gonna take credit for this, because if anybody does it, Jason, I promise you I'm gonna lose my mind. I wrote about this in the article, and I'm saying it here publicly. I think this would be a home run, and if they end up doing it, I'll go crazy. If Nick Diaz retires, Nick Diaz should do a first take like show on UFC Tonight with Chael Sonnen. I think that would be a home run, because the first time that Chael Sonnen thought Nick Diaz was too stupid and tried to slip one by the goalie, I think Nick Diaz would probably come over the table on him. So I think that there's a whole market for Nick Diaz. Here's the problem, and you even alluded to this. Now comes the part where all Nick Diaz's marketing people go, wait a second, Nick Diaz has sponsors. Don't let him sell you this sob story, because they don't want to look like they're not doing their jobs. So they're kind of coming out and speaking differently. But then yet, for all his sponsors, he comes out to the weigh-ins wearing a Stockton sweater. And I know his sponsors are like, this is why we don't want to, you're coming out wearing a sweater that says Stockton on it, when you could be putting you could look like a NASCAR and be making all kinds of money. So you spoke to his marketing people. What sense do you get from them about either his willingness to be marketed or his potential to be marketed?
The funny thing is, he wore that Stockton sweatshirt at the weigh-ins and the next day walking out. So it was just, I don't know if he didn't pack or what the deal was. But with that being said, their marketing people at VFD Marketing indicated to me that Nick Diaz is a polarizing figure, and whether you hate him or love him, you're talking about him. And I think that is that's what attracts certain sponsors toward him. And the fact that he may not be the traditional guy of wearing the T-shirt out or the hat out, might lose him some money. But definitely, from what I'm told, it's not too hard to find sponsors for him. So now, whether it's now with that being said, I'm not sure how hard it is for them to do any other deals where Nick is, say, signing autographs or conducting a seminar or doing any other kind of thing outside of the octagon, where you're monetizing your brand, where you're doing other things to get you out of that fight to get you out of fighting, where you're doing other things and building your own businesses. When he was talking about, oh, maybe I should invest stuff, when in his post fight interview, where I need to invest my money. Well, these are things he could invest in if he was able to play the game and invest, do a lot more things working with sponsors. He'd be in a much better position. But getting back to the point as far as the concern with sponsors, it doesn't sound like there was a want of concern. He did, on his fight shorts, he did have more sponsors than he usually did. So obviously the fact that the promotion of the fight, the marketing agents are working till Thursday night until, I believe it's Friday morning, where they have to turn in the shorts and everything to the UFC to make sure it looks good on TV and all that stuff. They work until the very last moment to try to get broker deals for him.
Yeah, and you'd think there is some stuff out there for him. I mean, even something small like having a stake in there. I think there's things out there where he can keep his street credibility, where he can keep who he is as a person. I mean, this guy, he says he's a vegan. Actually, I think he corrected it to say he's a vegetarian. But I mean, I'm sure there's like some kind of nootropics he could work. I mean, there's things that he does as part of his life that really he could be more. Eli Manning does watch. He does advertisements for watches. Nick Diaz could be, advertises for Ironman watches. I mean, there's things that he could do. He could have a stake in Middle Easy. I mean, if someone's selling Wolf Ticket T-shirts and Nick Diaz doesn't get a cut of that, that's a shame, because that's not taking full advantage of what actually caused this to happen. So let me ask you a question. He said he wants to retire, but how does this admission that he may have not paid taxes all along? Now, Cesar Gracie said he's probably overpaid. Nick says he's never paid. I'm sure the truth's probably somewhere in the middle. Does this admission that he hasn't paid taxes and at least some scrutiny that's going to come from the IRS mean that we're probably going to see him for a while?
Yes, he'll need a job. I definitely think that the tax comment took everybody for a loop, took Cesar Gracie for a loop, took everyone for a loop. He mentioned, Cesar Gracie mentioned that his brother Nate had accounts. So, which leads me to believe, like, what happened with Nick? Why isn't Nick doing what his brother does and taking care of his business and just having someone do his paperwork for him? He could very well be one of those fighters that falls into the category of someone who needs to find a fight wherever he can because he owes this money. The fact that he says that he owes money to the tax man made it all over the internet. I'm not sure if the IRS bell rang and he'll have to be audited, but we'll see. I mean, Cesar Gracie did him a favor by saying, "Oh, he's paid his tax. He's paid a lot of taxes." Well, someone will have to determine that. So, but to get back to the question, to the answer to your question, even though he said he's going to retire, I definitely see him coming back. If they offer him a fight with X amount of dollars, he'll definitely come back.
I think that his legacy now is, like I said, I think he'd be a great guy to kind of, be the. I think that you could market him, even on a UFC Tonight or whatever, as that superhero of anti-bullshit, where he goes and just takes, kind of gives it to you straight. And there's definitely a post outside of the cage way for Nick Diaz to make money if he should so choose. I think that he's best suited in these grudge matches, though. I really think he should fight a guy like Rory McDonald. He's got history. He fought GSP. Rory's the same gym. We want to slow down Rory's ascension anyway, so let him fight some kind of weird. I just think that there's ways to. I think you should market Nick and put Nick in fights with guys that are going to talk shit with him, and that's the way to best serve him and make him more money. But I think there's a lot of money still to be made, with him. Now, my other question to you, because I'm starting to see maybe the writing on the wall, or maybe I got my ear to the ground and I'm hearing the Buffalo stampeding, but I want to know if this Chris Camozzi situation, he's telling UFC fighters to turn down these lowball offers from sponsors, does that set the table for a fighters union in your opinion?
Short answer, no.
Okay.
I think Camozzi is essentially pointing out what is happening, and I applaud him for speaking out and letting everyone know a little bit behind the scenes of how sponsors work. And I definitely think that he is brave enough to come out and say that, like, I'm taking less money because I don't want to, I don't want to set a pattern of being lowballed by sponsors. I'm not sure what happened. Like, if you have the fight on a DVR, he did have two sponsors blocked out on his walkout shirt. So I'm not sure if he was specifically talking. They were on his shoulders. I don't know if he was specifically talking about those two sponsors. But as far as and the thing is, in his blog post, he even said, "I'm not talking about a fighter's union." But with the issue he's bringing up, he's talking about a fighter's union.
Yeah.
And so the problem is what he's asking, and he's asking for fighters to take a stand and not take lowball offers from certain sponsors. And and it's just this whole interplay of, well, these sponsors are probably paying the UFC more than they are paying their actual fighter to wear their brand, whatever that may be. And so definitely with a union, you could definitely negotiate those terms, but that's something that Dana doesn't. Let's face it, Dana probably doesn't want a union, and I don't see a union occurring. And with the fact that they're having, they're cutting people more frequently, it's a concern for people's job security. And if they start to rock the boat with coming out again in support of a union, you really are jeopardizing your future with the company.
Yeah, which is unfortunate because either it's going to be in existence or it's not, and I understand why Dana doesn't want one to happen. I get it. I know what they bring, but at the same time, to kind of institutionally try and stop something like that by saying, okay, well, because again, they have the free reign to cut fighters for whatever reason they want. Dave Herman stays, Matt Riddle goes. So I don't know, man. I think that if you're a guy that fights the UFC in creating a fighters union, you're going to be very unpopular with Dana, which means you're going to be very unpopular with the fans because Dana's popular with fans. But I mean, at the end of the day, you're a Kurt Flood in a sense. You're trying to do something in a sport that it has not existed in prior. So from that perspective, when you look at it that way, it kind of gets a little. It takes on a different tone for me. But like I said, go ahead.
Oh, and I think the only way a union can happen in the UFC, if you take a guy like GSP or John Jones or somebody like that who has some more like a Chael Sonnen, somebody who has a platform already, not afraid of what happened to them, and they are the leaders of someone that brings together other fighters for a union. With that being said, I know Randy Couture was somebody that had thought about a union earlier on, and you see how that relationship ended. I definitely think that that's what it would take for a band of top-level fighters to come together for the UFC to definitely address the situation in a serious fashion, rather than if you got a Chris Carmody. No disrespect to Chris Carmody, but like if you got a guy that low on the totem pole, it's probably not going to make too many waves.
Yeah, and it's weird too because you'd almost have to be super organized, kind of surreptitiously, if you're these guys, because not only would you have to all band together, but the thing that the UFC has going for it is that if you're John Jones and you leave the UFC, not only do you not fight in the UFC anymore, but there's really no one for you to fight. No one wants to see you fight these guys in these other organizations called all the best fighters. So it's almost like you would have to leave. It's almost like the top 5 guys in like 4 divisions would have to leave and then ultimately fight each other on cards to have any kind of clout. So it's really a tough thing to do, or just hold out and say we're not going to fight. But then UFC fighters don't make so much money that you can just afford to do that. So all right, moving on. I want to get to the stock up, stock down. Last week we started with the ups and ended with the downs. I'm going to start with the downs. That way we can end on a good note.
Okay.
We can end positively. All right, so number 5 of your stock down is Nate Marquardt. Talk to me about Nate.
Nate, I think Adam had alluded to it earlier. Nate, I'm not sure if he's still suffering from his last Strikeforce fight or what. He was definitely knocked out, even though he had protested the whole thing. I don't know where it puts him as far as with the UFC. Dana was non-committal on that when asked at the post-fight press conference whether or not Nate would be cut. For a guy that was not supposed to ever be in the UFC ever again, and for him to lose in the first round, the writing could be on the wall for him.
All right, well, I completely agree. Yeah, I think that he's, losing to Safadine and losing to Ellenberger, both guys looked impressive. I'm really interested to see. It's funny when guys cross over, and not to bring Tarek Safadine into a conversation that really has nothing to do with him, but it's funny when certain guys cross over, like when Melendez is going to fight, it's almost going to be like a unification bout, and then, when other guys have fought, it's kind of these unification bouts, and then some guys it's not. If you don't want to put the Strikeforce champ immediately in there with the UFC guy, oh, we're not going to unify that belt. But if, Melendez fights, or this guy fights, or that guy fights, it's a unification belt. Yeah. Okay, next up is the WWE. Now, we both have talked about my lack of desire for wrestling and UFC or MMA crossover. But the reason why I kept this on here was 2 reasons. One, what you and I talked about was how high WWE pay-per-views are now raising to. And also, I kind of wanted you to touch on the Dana White-Vince McMahon situation where Vince McMahon had posed to Dana White about fighting on a WrestleMania card. And, talk about those 2 things and then why you think WWE stock's down.
Okay, well, WrestleMania 29 is going to be $70, which is pretty steep. It's on par with the Pacquiao Marquez fight, which was in December, for $70. And so I guess what you get with $70 is an extra hour. I think the pay-per-view is going to be 4 hours long. Brock Lesnar is going to be on it. The Rock versus John Cena is going to be on it. I think that's what the draw is. It's pretty steep. I think there's a lot of people out there that are squawking about why they're raising their prices on it. It's obviously their biggest pay-per-view event of the year. But realistically, it's a pretty steep price to pay. As far as the Dana White Vince McMahon situation, Dana revealed at one of the pre-fight interviews on a Montreal station that he was approached by Vince McMahon to do some sort of fight or something with Vince McMahon at a WrestleMania. Either it would be a staged fight or some kind of real fight with Vince McMahon, and White declined simply because both of them are old. And it's funny because Dana White has always been someone who's had respect for Vince McMahon, and I've noticed that when you hear Vince McMahon talk, he'll take his shots at the UFC, no doubt about it. He'll when people try to compare his product and the UFC's product, he'll definitely take a shot at them. Whereas Dana White has been pretty more respectful of Vince McMahon and hasn't been someone who's taken shots back at Vince. I don't know what the relationship is there. There's definitely some respect there. But one of the things about Vince McMahon approaching Dana White is the recognition that the UFC is an up and coming sport, and it's something that's in the mainstream.
Well, it's interesting because I want to kind of pose 2 points to you before we move on to the next stock down. But I guess I find it interesting that for Dana White to get in bed with pro wrestling kind of loses credibility for his product because it's supposed to be real, and it's the vice versa effect for Vince McMahon. He gains credibility by working with the UFC. If he threw a couple real fights on, because I remember they did a thing back in the day where I think Billy Gunn or somebody maybe fought a real fight.
Yeah, it was King of the Ring, or I forgot what it's. It was where they had people doing real fights with gloves and everything, and I think what it was is that Billy Gunn won, and he was going to fight Butterbean at WrestleMania. Well, that didn't work too well because Butterbean knocked him out within a minute, and that was actually the end of Billy Gunn's career in the WWF or WWE. and that was overall a horrible idea on their part. But they've had people in the past have characters of being cage fighters, things of this nature, and now they got Brock Lesnar back, and they've always touted him once since he's come back as his former mixed martial arts background. He does throw in certain martial MMA moves when he does fight, so I think there's that crossover there.
Let me ask you a real quick question. I'll just hop in. As far as when they kind of price pay-per-views, maybe it's because I'm an MMA fan. Obviously, I do the MMA podcast. So when I look at something and I go, what am I getting for my dollar here? $70 for something that someone already knows. That, not to say it's not entertaining, but the outcome's already known. Versus, I think MMA cards are very exciting. Versus boxing cards, which I think can be boring. You get one maybe good fight, maybe a good fight, maybe two. How do they determine where these price points come from? Because it seems like obviously that you would get more bang for your buck with the UFC.
I definitely think so, and I definitely think that you get less for your buck with boxing pay-per-view. I mean, Marquez Pacquiao in December was $70, and most definitely, don't get me wrong, that fight itself was worth $70. But usually, for the most part, you're tuning in just for one fight on a boxing pay-per-view. You don't even know what's going on the undercard. So realistically, you're paying $65, $70 for just 1 hour of a fight. As far as the WrestleMania pay-per-view goes, it's definitely something that it's their marquee event of the year. It's the biggest event of the year for the company. The company is attempting to start a network, which it has yet to get off the ground. So perhaps this price point here is an effort to get a little more money to fuel that network. One of the things when that network comes up is that they'll have every pay-per-view on that network with the exception of WrestleMania. So maybe it's a last stab at their pay-per-view business where they'll definitely could sell it. They got all the marquee players out there, and that's the only reason why I think that they have listed the price point up at $70.
All right, and it didn't do anything for them. Put them on your stock down, Jason. Maybe they should have rethought it. All right, so up next on stock down, Carlos Condit. Carlos looks great in all his fights, but loses some, wins some. He's I don't want to call him the Frankie Edgar of the 170-pound division, but he's always a game fighter. He always comes forward. His chin is iron. How'd he get on your stock down?
I actually probably should have taken him off the stock down now more than I think about it, but I do think he's a hard luck loser, similar to Frankie Edgar. I mean, he has looked great in his fights, but he's ran the past two fights. He's just ran into guys that have bested him, and you could arguably say that he may have won the Johnny Hendricks fight, but he's definitely in need of a win. He's definitely a guy that's in need of a win, and I think Adam had said that he's probably going to take a little vacation before taking another fight, and I would think that would be best for him to kind of clear his head. And he's still one of the top fighters in that division. It's just that he does need to get on. He needs to get his hand raised, and I definitely think that whether it be Rory McDonald or someone else, the next fight he needs to win. I mean, you can even if he does lose, that'll be 3 in a row, and I don't think he's going to be cut no matter what. He's a definite asset to that division. So I just put him on the stock down simply the fact he's lost the last two.
All right, well, and here's my two thoughts on Carlos Condit. I actually want to reach out to him on Twitter, and because I think that he is the guy in the UFC that's a supremely underused talent. I think Carlos Condit would be the best MMA analyst were he to go that way. That guy is bright. He gets in there. He's a killer. He goes in there. I mean, he's a legit tough guy, killer be killed type fighter, and he's smart. I think he should be an analyst tomorrow. and on his off time. For everything that I like about Brian Stan, I'm not crazy about him as an analyst. I think that he doesn't represent himself well as an analyst. I just think he's a better guy. I think Carlos Condit will be way better than Brian Stan. That aside, I think that if he's going to go on a vacation, he should take a vacation to San Jose and see about fighting at AKA for a little bit, because that dude needs some wrestling. I mean, listen, against Hendricks, he kept getting taken down but got up. But dude, he needs to really get his his sprawl together, because he lost to GSP because of the takedown game. He lost to Hendricks in the takedown game. I think Roy will stand with him, but that's the major hole in his game. So I would definitely pack up the wife and kids and shoot over to San Jose, or at the very least Sacramento, and see what Alpha Male's got going on. Oh, yeah. So all right, next up, stock down. We're going to talk about Cesar Gracie.
Yeah, Cesar Gracie, definitely. Dana White just blatantly just came out and said that he's bad for Nick Diaz, and he had gone on Twitter and had wanted people to tweet Dana White and ask for Nick Diaz to be upgraded to first class for his trip to from the West Coast all the way to Montreal, and quite frankly, that's something that a manager should do for his client. And Cesar Gracie manages Nick Diaz, and he should be the one to be held accountable for it. He definitely has. Let's face it, he definitely has a hard job managing Nick Diaz. But for Dana White to come out and say that he's bad for Diaz kind of says something about what's going on with the interplay between that camp and Diaz.
Well, yeah, it's never nice when Dana comes out and calls you out. We've talked in the past about the whole notion of being on Dana White's shit list, and it's not somewhere you want to be. You also don't want him talking negatively about you, because for all the issues that some people may have with Dana, he certainly has the fans' ear. So, if he starts telling people you're no good, you're going to hear about it, and it's best to be on his good side, that's for sure. Okay, number one stock down is his fighter, Nick Diaz.
Yeah, Nick Diaz, for the fact that he helped sell the fight, he still is someone that you just don't know what you're getting. And I think I think Dana White had said it best, if he just played the game just a little bit, he would be one of the most marketable fighters in the UFC. But he continues to just self-destruct in certain ways. I mean, the accusation, I think one of the reasons he's on the stock down list is they had this great, he raised GSP's hand. GSP put him over, saying, Nick Diaz is a great fighter. He's one of the best boxers in the MMA. And Nick Diaz retires in the cage. In a weird way, thanks GSP for recognizing what Nick Diaz has done. And then it kind of infers that maybe GSP knew what he was doing. Like, there was a mole in Nick's camp. There was also the fact that he basically accused GSP of using steroids at the press conference. Things like that are not good for Diaz. And again, if he were able to just take that away from his persona, he'd be one of the most marketable guys in the UFC.
And it's funny. When you listen to Joe Rogan's podcast, he says at the beginning of it, Joe Rogan train all day, Joe Rogan podcast by night. So I mean, those guys are cut from similar cloth. But Rogan does a pretty good job at promoting marijuana as a kind of a, I don't want to say performance-enhancing drug, because that gets a bad name, but he says, there are some uses for it in terms of, getting rid of your anxiety and helping you out creatively. But Nick Diaz isn't helping out the marijuana cause at all. I mean, if this guy's not absent-minded, one hand, he's paranoid on the other. So it's like, he's claiming about moles and all this other stuff, and it's just like, just have a normal moment where you just kind of either, I think he's like I told you, I think he has a lot more to give to the sport in general. I think he's the right kind of guy. He just doesn't know how to put that out there. I mean, you don't do what he did in that conference call unless you are a really, outgoing kind of, effervescent kind of guy that just kind of can put your thoughts, stream of consciousness kind of dude. I mean, that was something special, man. And if he can harness that and put it into a book or something, he's got something to give. and he's a martial artist. He's a true one. He just, Dana's right. It's not so much that he plays the game. He just can't, he just can't get his ducks in a row, man. His ducks are all over the pond. So I think that if he does that, him and Cesar Gracie, all those guys, man, they can really set themselves up nice financially if they didn't just take so much pride in being, so counterculture. So,
and
right,
I think one more thing, and I think the thing with Nick Diaz is just perhaps there needs to be a break between him and Cesar Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. Maybe that's run its course. He needs to go somewhere else and get away from that. Maybe just link up with other fighters. I know he is very close with Melendez and Jake Shield, but perhaps he needs to go out there and sever ties with Cesar Gracie and find some other management there.
These guys, man, they're super marketable, and it's just waiting right there for them. And it seems to me like they don't want to go out and get it. I mean, they got a cool nickname. They call each other the Scrap Pack. That's been around forever. Jake Shields is a good-looking guy. Melendez, Nick Diaz. I mean, these guys are guys that you can market, and they keep it real. So I mean, there's some marketability to that too. I just feel like they're just getting bad advice. All right, now let's move over to the Stock Up. Number 5 on Stock Up is the always popular and getting more popular every day Wolf Tickets.
Yeah, it's. I think it was just one of the funnier things on the press conference. It just the funny thing with social media is like once he said it spread like wildfire over social media as to what's this Wolf Tickets? What's he talking about? I thought that was one of the funny things as far as how the press conference went. Just a little funny thing for a stock.
Yeah, I got a kick out of that. It's I saw this thing on MTV, and I wish I could find it on YouTube. It was hilarious. It talked about like the timeline of something in the social consciousness, like a fad, and it was like it was a little kid that said the word bling, and it was like bling bling, and then next thing you know, their parents, like their older sister said it, bling bling, and then their mom said it, bling bling, and next thing you know, their grandmother said it, and then they had like the obituary, like bling bling from this date to that date, and they pronounced it dead. So you wonder when like Wolf Tickets, you wish that you could see how these things sort of ride themselves out. The day that I'm sure at some point, maybe 3 or 4 years from now, Nick Diaz is going to rue the day he ever said Wolf Tickets. He's probably going to get screamed at him and everywhere he goes for 2 years. It's just like Dave Chappelle. He did that famous thing in his comedy act where he's like, I'm really glad I did the Chappelle show and I did that Rick James thing, but it'd be nice if people would stop running up to me telling me they're Rick James, bitch, in front of the kids.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things, man. It's great when it happens, but people take things too far. So now, next up, Stock Up number 4, Jordan Mean. Talk to me about Jordan.
Wow, it was unexpected. The Miller boys are really tough guys, and for him, first of all, to get out of that armbar was ridiculously awesome. I thought it was done for. He showed a lot, and to be honest with you, I was not up on him as much as Adam was. So I was pleasantly surprised by him. You could also have as a 4A and 4B, TJ Dillashaw and Rick Story. Those two guys also were impressive on the undercard of UFC 158.
Yeah, and speaking of Rick Story, let's get to number 3 because as soon as I don't know what happened faster, Jake Ellenberger knocking out Nate Marquardt or Rick Story calling out Jake Ellenberger because he beat him prior. So let's talk to me about Jake Ellenberger, number 3.
Like I think we said before, he looked impressive against Nate Marquardt. The power was definitely there, and Ellenberger is making a case for himself to be up there in the welterweight division.
Well, he's right there at that perfect spot where if you play your cards right, you can call out the right guy. What he's doing right now is he's trying to call out the right guy because he said today, I want to make a necklace of Johnny Hendricks' teeth, which is right out of Mike Tyson's playbook of crazy shit.
Yeah.
So, but he's doing it, man. And the guy, it's tough. We talked about with Adam earlier. The curious case of Jake Ellenberger. You never know what you're going to get. But yeah, I think that he's on his best day. He's right there at top 5 in the world. On his worst day, Rick Story happens. So, it's interesting to see how he moves forward. All right, next up in Stock Up is Johnny Hendricks. Let's talk about Johnny.
Johnny Hendricks, I think what's not to talk about him, he was impressive and still staked his claim to to the #1 contender spot. He beat it. He got his hand raised against a tough Carlos Condit, and I think we talked about earlier. He is one of the biggest threats to GSP's title in some time. And that left hand, if it finds GSP, we could be looking at the next world champion.
Yeah, it's interesting, like you said. With TJ, I mean, Hendo has the H bomb. It's funny that they both their last names start with H because you can make a case that Hendricks has his own. I was telling TJ last week. I call that kid's left hand the light switch, dude. Because whenever he finds it, it's lights out for whoever gets caught with it. So, speaking of his next opponent, George St. Pierre, you have him #1 stock up, which is interesting because for all the criticism he gets, he just keeps rolling along. Talk to me about GSP.
I think, like you say, he just rolls along. No matter what people say, he continues to dominate. I think one of the most impressive things about GSP is the preparation that he takes into these fights, and he continues to dominate his opponents. And even though Diaz had some takedowns in the second, third round, Diaz couldn't do anything against GSP. And we talk about that the fight was not as was frankly kind of boring. But the fact of the matter is that GSP won. He continues to roll along, and as from a financial perspective, the pay-per-views will probably be around 900,000 buys, which makes him, the PPV king of the UFC, that is. And so he definitely is a stock up.
Yeah, I agree. I wonder, if I kind of wanted to touch on this with Adam, and we may have, a little bit earlier briefly, but I mean, if you're GSP, do you care? I mean, do you care what they're saying, or do you just kind of say, I'm making money for the company, I'm winning? I mean, you get caught up in all that stuff, or just leave it alone?
I think he definitely cares. I think you could see it at the press conference and at the teleconference that he was concerned with the things that Nick Diaz was saying about him, that he wanted to make sure that the people knew who GSP was, and to make that admission that that he doesn't send out his own tweets and things like that was an admission that he didn't have to make, but it seemed like something that he wanted to share with people. He definitely is concerned with his image. Does that equate to how he wins? I'm not sure if in this next fight against Johnny Hendricks he will have a choice as far as how he handles Johnny Hendricks, because as we see Hendricks come straight forward, and that left hand comes from different angles and from different setups, and that's something that will be interesting to see as far as how GSP addresses the defends against that left hand.
Well, yeah, and I guess what I think is interesting about GSP, and I'll get your thoughts on this real quickly, and then what I want to do is we'll go ahead and end on just you getting the last word, kind of looking forward. I think GSP's positioning himself to be like a blue chipper, and one of those guys that gets he just stays top shelf, and he always wants to be perceived that way. He doesn't necessarily feel like he needs to be a man of the people, but he wants blue chip, endorsements. He wants blue chip sponsors. So I think that he's trying to keep himself to that, upper crust kind of a guy, and you have to win to do that, right? I mean, do you get that sense from him that he wants to keep that air of, I have passive income, I have I don't do my own Twitter, not to necessarily alienate himself from people, but just to say, I'm a big deal, kind of. It sounds weird to say, but is he trying to position himself as a blue chipper?
I definitely think he is trying to distinguish himself from the others and show that he's the top of the heap. He's the king. He is the person that people aspire to be. So I definitely think he wants people to know that, and he definitely exudes that persona and confidence.
All right, sounds good. So I'll get you out of here on this. I appreciate your time. It's been a long night. We talked about a lot of great things, though. Let me just give you the last word on the UFC and MMA in general. What are you looking at moving forward the next couple of weeks?
Well, there's definitely. What do we have next? There's definitely we got a Sweden card, which is built by is it Musasi and Gustafsson that are going to be on that one.
They're the headliners, yes, sir.
They'll be the headliners. I actually am looking a little more ahead of the tough final, which will be interesting. Katsugano, Misha Tate. That is something that I'm looking forward to. Um, it's interesting because I really wasn't a huge fan of women's MMA for the longest time, but here I am. I think that's ahead for that's one of the cards that I'm looking most forward to, and then of course a little bit next month, over a month, we got Son and Jones. Um, it's interesting because I'm not sure this is how the UFC thought that this season of Tough was going to play out because you know I've watched it. I've been watching it, and they seem like best buddies. And unless there's some kind of turn at the end of this show, I don't see the heat for this actual fight. So we'll see how that goes.
Well, yeah, and just now on Twitter today, John Jones was talking a little bit about, like, I guess Chael Sonnen made a poem about Jones, and now Jones is saying it's crunch time. I'm not, we're not buddies anymore. So I think he's definitely kind of squaring his eyes a little bit and putting Jones or Sonnen in the crosshairs. But yeah, like you said, we got a great looking summer. So it's Gustafsson Musasi, and April looks fantastic. You got Gustafsson Musasi starting it off. You got a tough finale, which has Uriah Faber and Scott Jurgensen, Travis Brown and Gabriel Gonzaga, and then Misha Tate and Kat Zingano. You got Ben Henderson and Gilbert Melendez.
I forgot about that one.
Yeah.
I think that one is going to be one of the best fights of the year. If it'll be interesting because Melendez will be off of a long layoff against Ben Henderson, who you could arguably say is one of the hottest fighters in the UFC right now. How will those styles clash? That'll be interesting. Talking about the tough finale, Uriah Faber, the guy just keeps on going. It'll be interesting to see what they plan to do with him. He's a guy who keeps getting top level fights, but once he gets to that upper echelon, what do you do with him? If he wins, does he go up against Barao again, or what does he do? So.
Yeah, it makes for an interesting summer. So again, the UFC, albeit 100 fighters heavy, at some point, Jason, they're going to have to square the books up. So I think we should enjoy the fights up until that time, because at some point, Dana's not kidding around. He didn't just say that just to get guys to fight harder. He could have done that by saying we're going to cut a hell of a lot less guys than 100. So if he's trying to get down to 100, we need to really enjoy, these deep cards while we got them. So, all right, we'll go ahead and call it an end to this podcast. I'd like to thank my guest, Jason Cruz of MMAPayout.com. You can follow him at Dilettante. Jason, thanks for everything, and we'll see you next time.
Oh, hey, thanks much, John. You have a good night. We'll see you next time.
All right, no problem. And I'll end this podcast as I end them all by telling the fans out there to keep their chin downs and their chin down and their hands up. This is the Hot Cage Podcast.